Thank you very much, and thank you to Creek for organizing this event, and thank you to everyone for being present. I realize we have a time issue. I'll be very brief. I've been following with great interest the discussion about how the financing of politics should be regulated in Albania. It's worth noting that throughout the world, there is a lot of discussion if there should be limits on how much anyone can donate, how much parties and campaigns can spend, who should be allowed to make contributions, etc. The thing though, and the only point I'm making today, is that if we have donation limits or spending limits or restrictions on who can make donations, on how money can be spent, it does not matter. Or rather, it only matters if we ensure that compliance with these regulations can be and is monitored. All countries in the world have at least some regulations on party and campaign finance, but the vast number of these regulations are effectively ignored, and violations occur often with total impunity. What can be done about this? So one issue is, a rule of thumb is, do not introduce a rule on political finance, do not even propose a rule on political finance, unless you have a reasonably clear idea of how compliance with that rule can be monitored and how violations can be sanctioned. In practical terms, I propose, and I really do propose, that any proposed reform of party and campaign finance, be it in a draft legal amendment that goes to Parliament or in a report by a civil society group, there should be an explanatory note saying this is how the proposed regulation will be implemented in practice. I'll give you some practical examples. So let's say you're advocating that campaign donations from companies that hold public contracts should be banned. A reasonable idea, but you must then make sure that the institution mandated to oversee compliance with the provision, the CEC in the case of Albania, has access to public procurement records and can easily cross-check donation records with procurement data. This is a practical issue, but you won't believe how often it's forgotten in practice. Another example, if you want to set a limit on campaign spending, you have to define what constitutes campaign spending. And this is missing in the laws of a lot of countries. It's also helpful to require that campaign materials note who paid for them. This part of this is also to consider unintended consequences of regulations. So interim reporting, for example, was mentioned earlier. It's worth noting, by the way, that such reporting is not mentioned in the OSCE Audit and Venice Commission guidelines on party regulation. There is a risk that for the CEC to publish such reports shortly before an election, given that they has not had a chance to check the data in any way, they may be rewarding the contestant that lies the most. The implementability of regulations and the administrative burden of implementing regulations must also be considered when we think about addressing areas that are not currently regulated. Some of them have been mentioned already, the activity of non-contestants, often called third parties, or campaigning on online advertising. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't regulate those areas. What I am saying is that when we discuss such regulations, we must consider how they can be implemented in practice. Thank you very much.